I never thought a simple text message could destroy everything. Dad, you won't be joining us. Serena prefers to keep it just family. After 30 years of sacrifice, after losing my wife, after giving them my business, my money, my trust, I wasn't family enough. I stared at those words until my vision blurred, feeling like the biggest fool in Florida. But they made one mistake. They thought the broken old man would just disappear quietly. They were wrong. What I did next changed everything. Tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only father who's been thrown away like trash. The text message hit my phone at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, right as I was reviewing the Hendersons' landscaping proposal. The notification sound was the same cheerful chime I'd heard 1,000 times before, but somehow this one felt different. Maybe it was the way my chest tightened before I even looked at the screen. Dad, you won't be joining us. Serena prefers to keep it just family. I read those words 3 times before they sank in. My hands started trembling, actually trembling like I was some old man who couldn't handle bad news. But this wasn't just bad news. This was my son, my only child, telling me I wasn't family enough for their vacation. The same vacation I'd paid for? 3 weeks ago, Serena had bounced into my office with that bright smile of hers, the one that always made me think of my late wife's enthusiasm for family gatherings. Caspian, she'd said, perching on the edge of my desk like she owned the place, I found the perfect way for us to bond as a family. A Caribbean cruise, 7 days of sun relaxation and quality time together. She'd pulled out glossy brochures, spreading them across my desk like a dealer laying out cards. The photos showed crystal clear water, elegant dining rooms, families laughing together on pristine decks. It's perfect for a business retreat, too, she'd added with that practiced casualness that should have been my first warning. Completely tax-deductible. The company can write it off as a team-building exercise. $15,000. I'd written that check without hesitation, transferred the money from Holloway Landscaping's business account, with the same ease I'd used to buy office supplies. The joy on Bryce's face when Serena told him about the trip had been worth every penny, or so I'd thought. Now sitting in my office, surrounded by the familiar smell of fertilizer and the hum of the air conditioning unit, that never quite worked right. I felt like the biggest fool in Florida. The Henderson proposal lay forgotten on my desk, its neat columns of numbers, suddenly meaningless compared to the simple arithmetic of betrayal. Serena's family. That's who they were taking on my cruise. Her parents, probably her sister, with the loud laugh and the designer handbags. They'd be sipping drinks I'd paid for watching sunsets from a deck I'd reserved taking family photos that would never include me. The office felt smaller, suddenly like the walls were closing in. Outside, I could hear my crew wrapping up for the day, the sound of equipment being loaded, trucks starting up, the easy banter of men who'd put in an honest day's work. Normal sounds from a normal day that had just become anything but normal. I set my phone down carefully, as if it might explode if I handled it too roughly. The screen went dark, but those words were burned into my retinas. Serena prefers to keep it just family. As if 28 years of raising Bryce, of being there for every scraped knee and graduation and heartbreak, somehow didn't count as family. The silence in my office grew heavier. Through the window, I watched Mrs. Patterson from next door watering her roses, the same roses I'd helped her plant last spring when her arthritis was acting up. Simple kindness between neighbors. When had things become so complicated with my own blood? Something wasn't adding up here. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or family dynamics. Serena had been too eager about that cruise too quick with the business expense angle. And now this sudden exclusion delivered through my son like he was just a messenger boy instead of a grown man who should have stood up for his father. Something wasn't right. I needed to understand what had just happened to my family. The office suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. I needed space to think away from the lingering smell of fertilizer and the weight of that text message. I locked up earlier than usual, my hands still unsteady as I turned the key. The drive home gave me 20 minutes to process what had just happened, but every red light only made the hurt settle deeper. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the Florida sun was setting behind my modest ranch house. Inside, I settled into my worn leather recliner and let my mind drift back to when everything seemed simpler. 2 years ago, I thought I was building a legacy. Now I wondered if I'd constructed my own trap. It was 6 months after the funeral when Bryce first brought up the idea. I'd been struggling with the emptiness the way dinner had become a one-sided affair with the evening news. "Dad," he'd said over Sunday dinner at Cracker Barrel, "what if I came to work with you as a partner? The word partner lit up something inside me that I thought had died with my wife. Holloway Landscaping wouldn't just be a business, it would be a family legacy. I'd love that more than anything, I'd said probably too quickly. That's when Serena entered the picture in earnest. 6 months married to Bryce, still in that honeymoon phase where everything she said sounded like wisdom. Caspian, she'd said during one of our family dinners, leaning forward with earnest confidence, I have a background in accounting. Why don't you let me handle the books? It'll free you up to focus on the landscaping work you love. Perfect sense at the time. Bryce would learn hands-on business, Serena would manage finances, and I could transition into an advisory role. We'd spent hours around my kitchen table drawing up partnership agreements, discussing profit-sharing planning for the future. The lawyer's office felt like a celebration. Bryce signing as co-partner Serena, being added as authorized user on business accounts. I'd even taken them to dinner at the nicest steakhouse in town afterward. Those first months were everything I'd hoped for. Sunday dinners became business meetings. Serena would arrive with neat folders full of financial reports, explanations always thorough and professional. Bryce threw himself into learning the trade with genuine enthusiasm. I'd felt useful again, needed, part of something bigger than myself. But looking back now, I could see the signs I'd been too grateful to notice. How Serena always volunteered to handle the boring financial stuff before anyone else could offer. The way she'd subtly redirect conversations when I asked about specific expenses. How she'd pat my hand and say, "Don't worry about the details, Caspian. That's what I'm here for." I'd been so hungry for family connections, so eager to feel relevant again, that I'd handed over the keys without a second thought. Every signature, every password shared, every access granted, all wrapped in the warm glow of family togetherness. The leather chair creaked as I shifted. Outside, Mrs. Patterson's porch light flickered on a small beacon in the gathering dusk. Normal people living normal lives, probably never questioning whether their own family was manipulating them. Trust, I'd given them everything, including access to everything. The realization wouldn't let me rest. After staring at the ceiling for an hour, I gave up on sleep and padded to my home office. The desktop computer hummed to life, its blue glow, the only light in the dark room. My hands hovered over the keyboard. Part of me didn't want to know what I might find. The numbers on the screen told a story I didn't want to believe. Holloway Landscaping's business account loaded with its familiar interface. Everything looked normal at first, same clean layout, healthy account balance. But as I scrolled through recent transactions, my chest began to tighten. There it was, $15,000 to Caribbean Cruise Lines dated 3 weeks ago. The same day Serena had bounced into my office with those glossy brochures. But that was just the beginning. $800 to Premier Office Supplies, a company I'd never heard of. $1,200 for equipment maintenance to a vendor that didn't exist in my Rolodex. The amounts were always under $2,000. Small enough not to trigger flags, large enough to add up quickly. The pattern became clearer the deeper I dug. Business meals $300 to $500 weekly. But we rarely ate business meals. Most client meetings happened at job sites, standing in backyards, talking about irrigation systems. I clicked on transaction details. The restaurants were real upscale places in Tampa and Orlando I'd never visited. Places where a family might celebrate special occasions or entertain relatives. Then I found the transfers. Regular amounts moved to an unknown account, labeled contractor payments. But I knew every contractor we used. This account belonged to someone else entirely. I grabbed a legal pad and started writing down dates and amounts, my handwriting shakier with each entry. The cruise payment was just the tip of the iceberg. Over 6 months, dozens of questionable transactions, hundreds here, thousands there. 3 a.m. came and went. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut. Consulting services coinciding with Bryce and Serena's Miami weekend. Office renovation expenses totaling more than my annual salary for renovations that never happened. The business meals weren't business meals at all. They were family dinners, celebrations, date nights, all funded by Holloway Landscaping, while I ate frozen dinners alone. I leaned back, numbers swimming before tired eyes. The account balance I'd thought healthy suddenly looked different. We should have had more money, much more. The busy season had been our best in years, yet the balance showed barely more than last winter. My hands trembled, but not from shock this time, from slow-burning anger that started in my chest and spread like wildfire. This wasn't misunderstanding or miscommunication. This wasn't Serena being overly enthusiastic about expenses. This was theft. Systematic, calculated, deliberate theft. I printed 6 months of bank statements, pages of evidence that my own family had been bleeding my business dry while smiling across the dinner table. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. Dawn was breaking when I finally closed the laptop, eyes burning from hours of staring at numbers that didn't lie. I'd managed maybe an hour of restless sleep before the weight of discovery pulled me back to consciousness. By 7 a.m., I couldn't wait any longer. Curtis, I think something's wrong with my business accounts. Curtis Webb had been my friend for 20 years and my accountant for 15. His voice was instantly alert despite the early hour. Caspian, what kind of wrong? The kind that keeps you up all night printing bank statements. 30 minutes later, Curtis sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the professional concern that had made him one of Central Florida's most trusted CPAs. He'd thrown on khakis and a polo shirt, but his expression was all business as he spread my statements across the table. Walk me through what you found. I started carefully, not wanting to sound paranoid. The cruise payment, mysterious vendors, the pattern of just under $2,000 transactions. Curtis listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. These contractor payments? He said, tapping his pen against transfer entries. You don't recognize this account. Never seen it, and I know every subcontractor we've used in the past decade. Curtis scanned the numbers with his trained eye. When he looked up, his expression had shifted to something more serious. Caspian, this looks concerning. The word concerning from Curtis carried weight. He wasn't one to dramatize or jump to conclusions. In 20 years of friendship, I'd never seen him look quite this troubled over books. How concerning? The pattern suggests systematic diversion of funds. These amounts timing vendor names that don't check out. This isn't accidental bookkeeping errors. A memory surfaced of Curtis at last year's Christmas party, pulling me aside with a gentle warning I'd brushed off. Caspian, be careful mixing family with financial access. I've seen too many good people get burned. I'd laughed it off, then told him family meant something. Now his words felt prophetic. What are the implications? Curtis removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit from our most difficult tax seasons. If this is what it appears to be, we're potentially looking at embezzlement. Misappropriation of business funds for personal use. The amounts could make this a felony. The word felony hit like a physical blow. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was criminal. But we need to be thorough before drawing conclusions. Curtis continued, measured and calm. Document everything, verify every questionable transaction, understand the full scope. He leaned forward, mixing professional duty with personal friendship. Caspian, if what we're seeing is accurate, this isn't just about money. This is about trust, family, and potentially serious legal consequences for everyone involved. I nodded, feeling older than my 63 years. What do we do? Curtis gathered papers into neat stacks. Movements precise and methodical. We investigate. Properly, thoroughly, professionally. Get copies of everything, cross-reference every vendor. Trace every transaction. And we do it quietly until we know exactly what we're dealing with. He met my eyes across the table, both accountant and friend looking back. We're going to get to the bottom of this, Caspian, whatever it takes. Curtis's office felt different from his usual tax season chaos. The conference table was cleared except for my business records, spreadsheets, and 2 laptops humming quietly. We'd been at this for 3 hours, and the picture emerging was worse than I'd imagined. The evidence painted a portrait I'd been too trusting to see. Look at this progression, Curtis said, sliding a timeline toward me. His finger traced transactions starting 18 months ago, small amounts, at first barely noticeable, against legitimate business expenses. February of last year, $50 here, $100 there. Office supplies from vendors I can't verify. Then March, amounts double. By summer, we're looking at $500 to $1,000 per transaction. My stomach twisted as I followed his finger along the timeline, like watching a disease spread through my business, growing bolder each month. Curtis pulled up another screen. Your eye missed these because they were designed to be missed. Look at these vendor names. Premier Office Solutions, Florida Equipment Services, Sunshine Maintenance Group. Sound legitimate, right? They do, I admitted, feeling foolish. That's the point. But watch this. Curtis's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up business databases. None exist. No licenses, no tax ID numbers, no addresses that check out. The fake invoices were sophisticated professional letterheads, detailed line items, realistic payment terms. Someone had put considerable effort into making them authentic looking. Someone who understood how a trusting business owner might approve invoices without deep scrutiny. The personal expenses disguised as business costs are even more brazen. Curtis continued, opening another folder. Look at these client entertainment charges. Nordstrom, $500. Victoria's Secret, $300. A jewelry store in Tampa, $800. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. I recognized some dates times when Serena had mentioned shopping trips or appeared wearing new clothes. I'd assumed Bryce was treating his wife well with his salary. I'd never imagined he was treating her with stolen money. Curtis worked with methodical precision, creating categories, cross-referencing dates and amounts. His accountant's mind was perfectly suited for this forensic work, finding patterns that would have taken me weeks to uncover. The total impact over 18 months, he said, leaning back and removing his glasses, is $43,700. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, nearly $44,000. Gone, stolen, by my own family. That's not counting the cruise, Curtis added quietly. Or the opportunity cost what that money could have earned staying in your accounts. I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The denial I'd been clinging to hope this was all some terrible misunderstanding finally crumbled completely. This wasn't confusion or poor bookkeeping. This was theft pure and simple. Curtis began organizing evidence into neat folders, each labeled and dated with characteristic precision. Bank statements, fake invoices, vendor verification attempts, timeline analyses. Everything we'd need to present a clear, undeniable case. Caspian, he said, looking up from paperwork, this isn't just financial misconduct. This is documented embezzlement spanning 18 months. Any prosecutor would call this a slam dunk case. I nodded, feeling strangely calm for the first time in days. The uncertainty was over. The wondering and doubting and hoping for the best all finished. The evidence was undeniable. Now came the hard part. The hard part turned out to be waiting. I'd been sitting in my office since 8 a.m. manila folders, arranged like evidence in a courtroom. 7 days of them sipping drinks I'd paid for while I gathered proof of their betrayal. They walked in with Caribbean tans and guilty smiles. Serena bounced through the door, first skin, golden from sun, wearing a flowing sundress that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Bryce followed, looking relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. Caspian, Serena exclaimed, setting down an expensive new purse. Hope you didn't miss us too much. We brought you back some rum. Well, we would have, but airport security. She laughed at her own joke. Bryce managed a smile, moving toward his desk, as if this were just another normal day. Actually, I said, voice steady, I'd like to talk with both of you. Please have a seat. Something in my tone made Serena's smile falter. Bryce stopped turning with the first hint of concern. Is everything okay, Dad? I opened the first folder, spreading bank statements across my desk. That depends on how you define okay. Serena's eyes flicked to the papers. I caught the briefest flash of recognition before her expression smoothed back to practiced innocence. These are our business statements for 18 months, I said conversationally. I've been reviewing them with my accountant. We found some interesting patterns. I slid the highlighted statement forward. The $15,000 cruise payment circled in red. This payment for your Caribbean vacation, charged to Holloway Landscaping as business expense. Serena's chin lifted defensive. That was legitimate business retreat. Team building tax deductible. With your parents, your sister, I interrupted gently. Because according to the cruise line, that's who was registered. Your family. Color drained from her face. There must be some mistake. I opened the second folder. Invoices from Premier Office Solutions. $4,700 over 6 months. Problem is, Premier Office Solutions doesn't exist. The business license belongs to a pizza restaurant in Jacksonville. Bryce leaned forward, studying papers with growing alarm. Serena, what is this? Those were legitimate expenses. Her voice rose defensively. I was trying to help grow the company. Like this? I slid another statement across. 800 at Nordstrom listed as client entertainment. 300 at Victoria's Secret for business meetings. Jewelry store in Tampa, 800 for promotional materials. Bryce's face went white. He stared at highlighted charges, mouth opening without sound. $43,700, I said quietly. That's what's been taken from Holloway Landscaping over 18 months. Fake invoices, personal shopping, family vacations, all while you smiled at me across dinner tables. Silence except for air conditioning hum. Serena's breathing became shallow. Bryce sat frozen, staring at evidence like seeing it for the first time. Dad, Bryce whispered, I didn't know. I trusted her with books, but I didn't know it was this. Don't you dare, Serena snapped, whirling on him. Don't act like you didn't benefit from every penny. Who paid for your new truck, golf membership, that Miami weekend? Bryce flinched. Truth was written on his face. He might not have known specifics, but he'd known something wasn't right. He'd chosen not to ask questions. I gathered papers calmly, hands steady despite churning emotions. Evidence is clear, pattern undeniable. Only question is what happens next. Serena's mask had fallen away, revealing something cold underneath. You can't prove intent. You gave me access. You authorized me to handle books. To handle legitimate business expenses, I replied evenly. Not to create fake companies and steal from family. The family I thought I knew had never really existed. The truth had a way of stripping everything down to its essentials. 2 days after the confrontation, I sat across from attorney Harrison Wells in his downtown office, surrounded by law books and the weight of decisions I'd never imagined having to make. Taking legal action against family crosses a line you can never uncross. Mr. Holloway, Wells said, reviewing the evidence Curtis and I had compiled. What we have here constitutes a clear case of embezzlement. The documentation is thorough, the pattern is established, and the amounts involved make this a felony under Florida law. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of sharp confidence that came from handling difficult cases. His office walls were lined with certificates and awards, but what impressed me most was how carefully he listened. What are my options? Wells leaned back in his leather chair. Civil action to recover the funds, criminal charges, or both. Given the systematic nature of the theft and the use of fraudulent documents, I'd recommend pursuing both tracks simultaneously. The word criminal still hit me like a physical blow, even after everything I'd discovered. These weren't strangers we were talking about. This was my son, my daughter-in-law, the people I'd invited to Sunday dinner every week for 2 years. The criminal complaint needs to be filed with the police. Wells continued. I can arrange a meeting with Detective Brooks. He specializes in financial crimes and has an excellent conviction rate. An hour later, I found myself in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, sitting across from Detective Brooks, a methodical man in his 50s, who reminded me of Curtis in his attention to detail. He reviewed our evidence with professional interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is solid work, Mr. Holloway. Your accountant friend did you a real service. Most embezzlement cases don't come to us with this level of documentation. Filing the report felt surreal, like I was talking about someone else's life. But Detective Brooks treated it with the seriousness it deserved, explaining the process, the timeline, the likelihood of prosecution. We'll need to freeze the business accounts temporarily while we investigate, he said, and you'll want to revoke any access your son and daughter-in-law currently have. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours at the bank and with my business attorney, changing passwords, removing authorized users, and restructuring the partnership agreement. Serena's access to Holloway landscaping accounts was completely terminated. Bryce's authority was reduced to basic operational needs, with all major transactions requiring my approval. The phone call started that evening. Dad, please. Bryce's voice was strained, desperate. Don't destroy our family over this. Serena made mistakes, but she's trying to make it right. Can't we work this out privately? I'd listened to variations of this plea for 3 days now. Each call was harder than the last, but my resolve remained steady. This isn't about destroying family Bryce. This is about protecting what's left of my business and my integrity. Serena's calls were different, angry, manipulative, sometimes threatening. You'll never see your grandchildren, she'd screamed during one particularly vicious conversation, apparently forgetting that she and Bryce didn't have any children yet. The community reaction was mixed. Some of my longtime clients and fellow business owners expressed support, sharing their own stories of family betrayal in business. But others whispered behind my back. I could see it in the way conversations stopped. When I entered the hardware store, the way some neighbors avoided eye contact. Family business should stay in the family. I overheard Mrs. Henderson telling her husband as I walked past their yard. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was standing beside the garden I'd landscaped for them at cost as a favor. Curtis stopped by most evenings, sometimes with dinner, always with a steady presence that reminded me I wasn't alone in this. You're doing the right thing, Caspian, he'd say. It's hard, but it's right. The hardest part wasn't the legal procedures or the community gossip. It was the guilt, the voice in my head that whispered, I was being vindictive, that family should forgive family, that maybe I should have just absorbed the loss and moved on. But $43,000 wasn't just money. It was trust, respect, and the future security I'd worked 30 years to build. More than that, it was about drawing a line between love and enabling, between family loyalty and being a victim. Standing in my office late one evening looking at the partnership papers that would need to be completely rewritten, I felt the full weight of what I'd set in motion. There would be legal proceedings, possible jail time for Serena, the permanent fracturing of relationships I'd once treasured. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was protecting something worth protecting. I'd chosen justice over family harmony. The consequences would come. The consequences had rippled through our lives like stones in still water. 3 months after that office confrontation, I heard a familiar knock, tentative, almost apologetic. Through the peephole, I saw Bryce standing alone, hands shoved deep in his pockets. My son looked broken, but for the first time in years, he looked honest. "Dad," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" He'd lost weight. The easy confidence from his 20s was gone, replaced by something rawer but more genuine. I gestured him inside, noting how he glanced around the living room, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "I filed for separation from Serena," he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from my recliner. "Papers were served yesterday." I felt something loosen in my chest, though I tried not to show it. "How are you handling that?" "Better than expected." His laugh was hollow, but not bitter. Turns out it's easier to breathe when you're not constantly making excuses for someone else's behavior. We sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Outside, Mrs. Patterson tended her roses, the same ones I'd helped her plant, when my biggest worry was whether the sprinkler system would last another season. "I should have seen what was happening, Dad." Bryce's voice cracked. "Should have questioned the expenses, the lifestyle we were living. But it was easier to just not look too closely." "Well, why didn't you?" He stared at his hands for a long time. "Because I was scared of what I'd find, and because I liked feeling successful even if it was built on lies." The honesty surprised me. This wasn't the defensive, manipulated young man from 3 months ago. This was someone forced to look in a mirror and not liking what he saw. "I want to make this right," he continued. "I can't undo what happened, but I want to rebuild what we had. If you'll let me." I studied his face. "What does that look like?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I was hoping we could figure it out together. Maybe I could come back to work as an employee, not partner. Earn my way back up. Prove I can be trusted." The eagerness reminded me of the boy who'd helped me load mulch on weekends, so proud when I taught him to operate the riding mower. But I'd learned good intentions weren't enough. "If you come back," I said slowly, "it's on my terms. No special treatment. You clock in and out like everyone else. Earn your raises, and every financial decision goes through me." "I understand." And Serena, his jaw tightened. "Gone. Took what money she could access and moved back to her sister's in Jacksonville. Good riddance." Over following weeks, I watched Bryce slowly integrate back into Holloway landscaping. He showed up early, stayed late, worked alongside my crew without complaint. Other employees were initially suspicious, but his genuine effort gradually won them over. The business thrived in unexpected ways. Without Serena's constant drain, profit margins improved dramatically. We invested in better equipment, gave crew raises, and maintained healthy reserves. More importantly, I slept better at night. The constant anxiety I'd carried for months, wondering what financial surprise I'd discover next, was finally gone. Bryce and I began weekly dinners, carefully rebuilding our lost relationship. We talked about work, his future plans, everything except Serena. Conversations were tentative at first, but gradually became more natural. I was learning to balance forgiveness with wisdom, to separate love from enabling. My son had made terrible choices, but he was taking responsibility in ways that gave me hope. Rebuilding trust would take time, but finally we had a foundation of truth. 6 months had passed since I'd made the hardest decision of my life, and I was reviewing Holloway Landscaping's quarterly reports when the irony hit me. The numbers told a story of unexpected prosperity. Profit margins up 30%, employee satisfaction at an all-time high, and a waiting list of clients that stretched into next season. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was their first mistake. The business was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. Without the constant hemorrhaging of unauthorized expenses, every dollar we earned stayed where it belonged. We'd been able to purchase that new commercial mower I'd been postponing for 2 years, give my crew their first real raises in ages. and still maintained the healthiest cash reserves in the company's history. Bryce had proven himself through consistent, honest work. He arrived before me most mornings and left after the last piece of equipment was cleaned and stored. The crew had gradually warmed to him again, not because he was the boss's son, but because he'd earned their respect through sweat and reliability. Watching him load mulch alongside men who'd initially viewed him with suspicion had been one of the most satisfying sights of my professional life. My personal growth had been just as significant as the business recovery. I'd learned to set boundaries that actually meant something to trust, but verify to distinguish between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. The Caspian Holloway who'd signed over partnership rights without reading the fine print was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love didn't require martyrdom. The community response had evolved too. Initial whispers and sideways glances had given way to respect and even admiration. Other small business owners began sharing their own stories. Fathers who'd been taken advantage of by adult children. Partnerships that had soured. Family money that had disappeared into black holes of entitlement. I wasn't alone in this experience, and somehow that knowledge made the journey feel less isolating. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered my voice. The man who used to absorb every slight excuse, every betrayal, and prioritize peace over justice had learned to say no without guilt. When my nephew asked for a small loan last month, I declined politely, but firmly. When a potential client tried to negotiate down my prices by playing the family friend card, I stuck to my rates. These might seem like small victories, but they represented a fundamental shift in how I valued myself and my work. The relationship with Bryce was healing, but it was built on honesty rather than obligation. Our weekly dinners had become something I looked forward to, real conversations between two adults who'd both learned difficult lessons about trust, responsibility, and the price of poor choices. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened, but we weren't prisoners to it either. As for Serena, she'd become nothing more than an expensive lesson learned. The last I'd heard, she was working at a retail job in Jacksonville, her dreams of easy money replaced by the reality of minimum wage and damaged credit. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, but no sympathy either. Sitting in my office as the Florida sun set through the windows, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The scared, confused man who'd received that devastating text message seemed like a stranger now. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more at peace with himself. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when you're being wronged. Looking back at my journey, I realize how dangerously naive I was. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the warning signs when family starts treating your generosity as their entitlement. I almost lost everything because I confused love with enabling kindness with weakness. God taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Through this painful experience, I learned that God doesn't want us to be doormats even for family. God gives us wisdom to discern between genuine need and manipulation. We just have to be brave enough to use it. These betrayal stories are more common than you think. I have heard countless betrayal stories from other business owners who trusted the wrong people. But here's what I've learned from all these betrayal stories. They don't define us. They refine us. To my fellow grandpa, stories listeners, protect what you've built. Too many grandpa stories end with empty bank accounts and broken hearts. Don't let your grandpa stories become cautionary tales like mine almost did. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but as a warning. Trust your instincts. Verify everything. Love your family, but love yourself enough to set boundaries. The quiet strength you develop from standing up for yourself, that's worth more than any relationship built on lies. If this story resonated with you, I need your help. Please hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. Your comment below could be the encouragement another person needs to find their own quiet strength. Let's build a community where we protect each other from these painful lessons.